Hi, this is a retrospective on weeks 7 and 8 in practice. I am recording this in week 11, as you probably know, in early week 11, though you'll probably see it by about mid-week 11. So, so there's no excuse for it to be this late. It honestly just got pushed back because I was more anxiously focused on getting practice done, and then that got ahead of it every single day for absolutely ages, and I'm really sorry about that, but looking back on week 7 and 8 in retrospect has given me a much more straightforward narrative about what happened in week 7 and 8, and I think that that has really helped me refine down what to say for these kinds of videos, so that does help a little bit, and just help me focus down on what really happened. So my primary influences for these 2 weeks, and for the 2 weeks that would come after, was a video called Liquid Sakuga by Hob Sakuga, which was just a compilation of different types of liquid moving in different animes. And I say that because I really did get kind of stuck in a rut when it came to that sort of stuff. I wasn't entirely sure what to do or quite how to do it. I am working with a liquid that is different from other liquids in the sense that it is motivated and its movement is coming from within, not without. You know what I mean? But also, we need to not have it read as goo, which tends to be how motivated movement in liquid looks. It looks thicker because it's like stretching and moving on its own. So it was kind of a weird balance that I had to strike, that I did in some scenes, I think, accurately end up striking. But, yes, so that was one of my primary influences. My other influence, oddly, was an essay, and I'll get back to that in a minute. So, week 7, I am incredibly anxious about time. I'm making meetings with Moon. I think this was week 7, it might have been week 8, but I'm pretty sure it was week 7. I'm making meetings with Moon, talking about how I can cut down, take shots out, and how I can shorten this process into something that I can do, because I'm barely meeting the halfway point in the semester of the number of shots I have to do, and I'm already pulling all-nighters just trying to get this thing done. So I do end up cutting a bunch of shots. That's probably the first big decision I made in week 7. And then with that confidence, I then went in to do some of the bigger shots of the piece, with regards especially to how liquid moves. But then that became itself a problem because I got so caught up in doing those shots. I was spending about 3 days at a time on them, which is difficult because of if I have to work 3 days a week and I have to do this 3 days a week, that's an entire week gone with just 2 shots done in it, or just one, which feels like an enormous waste of time, even if it was incredibly fun to animate. I really do love animating. I still haven't gotten burned out, which is a good sign for how much I do love this job, but I was still working slowly, and when I'm working too slowly, I'm not getting these things done properly. So, okay, so shots are getting done, but very, very slowly, 2 of the bigger shots, and I'm back on the time crunch panic train. And I talk to Moon, and we decide, she talks to me about having to perhaps hand in work that is just the finished line work and the finished animation. And from that, I'm starting to anticipate the idea that maybe I can just do line work, just as the style of the short. This isn't when I've settled on that idea, but that is where that idea came from. And I was really considering my influences from back in the day, like La Linea, which is all just moving lines. I mean, that's motivated lines, singular lines, in which things are abstracted to the point of no context, where there's just massive colored spaces and figures moving in those spaces, made of just singular lines. So that's part of definitely one of my influences for this. But yeah, then when I did make the leap to moving to just plain lines on a plain background, it did come with its own big set of issues, because abstraction is innately about the condensation of information on some level, and information was getting lost. So first things first, color was a big part of how I was differentiating depth in the short originally. Like, you can tell from my original backgrounds that they start out redder and then get yellower and yellower as they fade into the background. That gets lost with regards to this, and it is really easy to read the new background as being deep like the old background if you have memorized the old background. But my audience isn't going to come in with that knowledge, you know. So I had ended up I made a lot of adjustments to how I did my line style. I did end up including shadows, which I didn't originally want to do, but you can't really avoid it because things were so flat and so abstract that I was worried that they would become unreadable at a certain point, especially because the alien landscape is already something foreign. It's not referencing real life objects. So that is a problem in itself. Also, another issue that it created was color was a big part of how we were differentiating characters. So you might not know this because I haven't submitted a version of this with colored characters, but the main female character, the astronaut, is black, and her husband is white. And the confusion that people keep considering him her mother would be pretty alleviated if they were colored properly, because it's easier to tell the difference between them, much easier to read the difference between them. But I ended up having to cut that. So what do? Well, I leaned more on his size and stature and her smallness and sort of petiteness. This would end up becoming a bit of a problem later because she reads a bit more like a child. But anyway, that was another thing that it came to differentiation. Showing just how big and masculine and stuff he was. I also ended up adding chest hair to him so that he was much more noticeably like a guy, you know what I mean? I could have cut his long hair, but it felt really essential to displaying the wind that is in the space that she's in, including which is going to work alongside the audio that that Keir has designed for the shot. It's just going to show that like the outside is stifling and the inside in this promise of being at home is breezy and light, and I think the hair is a big part of that, and it adds a lot of secondary movement which keeps the shots interesting as well. So I didn't want to cut that. I didn't want to give him a beard because I remember back when I first did this in PPP, I gave him a beard and I couldn't find a way to not make it look bad. So I kept the beard out. Yeah, and so the part of the reason that I think cutting the color and keeping it as just lines on colored backgrounds really works is firstly because it really helps us differentiate different locations easily. It's all one color or another color. It's very, movie made in the 1910s when the only way to show differences in location was to change the color of to dye the film a different color. I think that is kind of the impression that you get with it, though that's kind of coincidental, but it's also with them and with me, it is just utility. It is really helpful to be able to do that. The other useful thing I find, and with this I'm partly referencing my work that I did in research methods, and I'm partly referencing an essay called Eye of the Beholder that I read that gave me some interesting ideas. I think it is useful to have a language visually that is all line work, so that when the line work corrupts, its language changes, it shifts over itself, it changes from edge defining lines to expressive lines and back very suddenly, you feel a bit more betrayed by it because you were relying on those lines to tell you how the world worked, and suddenly they're not doing that job that they were doing before, or they're doing it but not in the same way. And I think that is the effect that I quite like about this short. And that really leans into the core of the short, which is to question your comforts, which is to establish various languages and then break those visual languages so that they don't function anymore, and suddenly the audience is on the back foot, like, well now what does everything look like? How does depth work if lines can cross over each other? What is this like? How am I supposed to make decisions about how to perceive this if the rules that I had been using don't work anymore. And I think for a horror short, that is a really effective feeling, and I really like it. So yeah, that was the other major impetus for making that decision. And it wasn't fully realized when I made it, but now in retrospect, it was one of the best decisions I could have made for the short. It really, really is.